Welcome to Reading the World. I'm Ali Alhajji. Today I want to begin with a simple claim and then complicate it. On this show, we treat reading as a method, not only something we do with books, but something we do to people, to testimony, to the institutions that sort us. And here is the thing about reading in that wider sense. Every framework that lets you see also blinds you. The courtroom teaches one way of attending to a human being, the clinic teaches another, a contemplative tradition teaches a third. These are not the same reading, and they do not always agree. So, what happens when the way of reading a person that helps you win in a courtroom, in an argument, is the same way of reading that stops you from understanding them? My guest has, by his own account, lived inside several of these worlds. He came up as a criminal trial lawyer, later worked as a clinical social worker, and now teaches meditation and writes. I'm less interested in the biography as a sequence of lives and more interested in the seam between them, what each world trained him to notice and what each one is built to miss. Let me bring him in. My guest today is Bob Martin, who carries the credentials JD, MSW, and CMT, and describes himself as a mindfulness mentor for professionals. By his own account, he has worked across 3 professional worlds, as a criminal trial lawyer, as a clinical social worker, and as a meditation teacher. He's the author, published as R.H. Martin, of a novel and of a Taoist Christian devotional. He also runs a commentary platform called The Flow, which he frames as neither left nor right. I won't recite the full biography because part of what interests me is exactly that he has inhabited reading systems that do not reconcile easily. Bob, welcome.
Let me thank you first for the incredible amount of work that you do to put together a platform like a podcast.
Bob, I want to start by getting the terms straight because everything else depends on it.
Mm-hmm.
On this show, we treat reading as a method of inquiry, something you do to people, to testimony, and institutions, not only to books. You have worked inside a courtroom, inside criminal social work, and inside contemplative practice. When you say each of those taught you to read human beings, what do you actually mean by read?
Is to push a theory or an idea out to its extreme and see what happens there, because at the extremes, the subtle differences between things become very obvious. Walls, as you say, are leading to human experiences that are at the edge of existence. In criminal law, of course, we deal with folks who have been harmed, how they have been harmed. Maybe a loved one has been killed or robbed, or some great loss has occurred. A house has been burnt. And people are at the edge of their experience. In social work and therapy, we're dealing with people who emotionally are at the edge of what they can cope with. They wouldn't come looking for a therapist if they were able to cope with whatever issues they have. It's when they're at the edge of their ability to cope that they come and say, please help me. I can't figure this out. And then in meditation, that restrains us, that prevents us, that limits us, that limitation, again, pushing against the edge where the learning occurs. So have a certain common thread between them.
Let's keep them separate because all 3 frameworks taught the same kind of attention. The tension between them disappears. You have described those as 3 different professional worlds. If we set them side by side, which one trained you to pay attention to things the others taught you to ignore?
I suppose criminal law has taught me to be able to compartmentalize my own personal engagement. It teaches a very odd skill, which when people look at lawyers, it's the skill that makes them shake their head and not really understand, lawyers too much. Because somehow we have the ability to become passionate about standing up for someone and speaking for someone, and then we either win or lose the case, and then we wake up the next morning, we say, next case, and we let it go.
Yes.
So we become totally engaged, totally involved, and then we just let it go. Is it an important skill? And in social work, you also need to be open and vulnerable, and at the same time not take on the pain of your client, but at the same time be vulnerable enough to understand it. We are examining and questioning our very thought process. And that's not something that we do in criminal law. Of course, there's not much separation between me and my thinking.
I want to also push back also a little bit for the separation. Those frameworks didn't arrive together. Let's go back to the courtroom where the first one formed. I want just enough of the arc to make the argument legible, and I'm after the belief underneath the story, not the story itself.
Okay.
You began, by your own account, as a criminal trial lawyer in Miami during the era people now call the cocaine cowboys, period. Set the era aside for a second. What did that work require you to believe about people in order to do it well?
It is, I think I would go to the day that I was sworn in as a lawyer. And I went before the judge. And as is the tradition, I went and took the oath of office. And all of the other lawyers that happened to be in the courtroom, they all stood up in like a receiving line. And I went down and shook their hands and they congratulated me. And there was this one lawyer, an older man, and he looked at me with a wink and he said, "Son, just remember that in every sinner, there's a little saint. And in every saint, there's a little sinner."
What did the courtroom require you to treat as true about people?
I think the most profound lesson that I learned from all of the courtroom experiences is that what happens and what the consequences of an action are to a person do not affect them as emotionally as whether or not they are heard. I think that we all have had the experience with our loved ones that we've gotten into arguments. And one of the wise adages that I've always loved when in that situation is to ask the question, would I rather be right or would I rather be happy?
Yes, that's a good question.
Client would come into the courtroom and they've done something wrong and they're going to perhaps be imprisoned for it. And it took me several years to understand that I was making a lot of money. I had a spiritual transformation that after that, my goal of lawyering became much different.
I see.
Before, I would say it was about winning. And it was about making money, and it was about winning. After this transformation, my goal with each client was different. Of course, I was going to advocate for them to the best of my ability. That goes without saying. But I committed to myself that when this person left my presence, when the case was over, and whether they got probation or whether they were released or whether they went to prison for 1 year or 5 years or the rest of their lives, there were three things that were important to me. And when they left my presence, one, they felt that they had been heard, that somebody listened to them, heard their story, really cared. Two, that somebody stood up for them, that you stood up for them. And three, that they understood why what was happening to them, even if it wasn't fair, because a lot of results were not fair. but motives that people had to do things, at least they understood the context of what had occurred to them and why it had occurred to them. And I found that if I had accomplished these three goals, that the chances of their being a recidivist, of their being in the revolving door and recommitting and coming back into the system were greatly. So the learning is you need to listen to people and allow them to tell their stories.
Yes. Let's start with the courtroom as a reading instrument. You have worked with testimony, contradiction, and silence. What does a trained trial lawyer learn to read in silence specifically? And what does that same skill make you misread? Again, going back to the reading question, which we will keep actually throughout the episode.
It reminds me of an anecdote. So
Sure.
I had a case where this was a case I was prosecuting, not defending. And I had a family member of the accused up testifying. The accused was sitting there and he was fiddling around with a pen. And
I see.
At one point, she turned and she looked at him and said something that was probably not allowed, but she got it out anyway. She said, you were such a fine young man. You could have grown up to be somebody worthwhile, but you've wasted your life. Now, that's totally improper, but she just said it. And in that moment, there was a little bit of silence in the courtroom, and he had been holding a pen. And when she said that, the pen snapped. It went crack. And that crack, you could hear it all over the courtroom. And I think it was the crack of that pen, that sound that was in the middle of the silence that spoke so eloquently about this man's guilt. The jury came back in moments and found him guilty. So within that silence, there was this pow. It was a very moving moment.
That's a great anecdote. So if we move to social, maybe you are closer to what you are practicing now than being a lawyer, because it's probably it has been a while. So I'm going to move to social work. Social work reads a person almost in the opposite direction, toward understanding rather than toward the verdict. When you crossed from one to the other, what did understanding let you see that judgment had been hidden from you?
The whole concept of social work is that you always go to where the client is. It requires a leap of faith. You have to place yourself into a vulnerable place of trust and acceptance and be willing to suspend judgment. So when I say suspend judgment, it does not mean not to have judgments, because we have judgments. The moment something happens, we have a judgment. Boom. Something happens.
Yes.
Boom. We have a judgment. Somebody walks into the room, says, that's a lousy dress. That dress doesn't become that person, or that's a bad color for them, or this is good and that's bad, or this is right and that's wrong. I mean, all the time. But you have to recognize the judgment and simply put it aside and say, well, I'm not going to pay attention to that. So there's a certain skill that's involved in that. You have to be vulnerable, because you have to place yourself in this position of trusting and allowing the person to be exactly as they are. If I met you on the street and I opened myself up, I stand a very good chance of being disappointed or surprised about not knowing you at all. So this is a vulnerable place to be, because you're going to trust and not judge and accept the person as they are. And then you may find out that the person has some pretty uncomfortable thoughts. They might be misogynistic. They are a good white racist, misogynistic, judgmental, authoritarian person. And everything about them, all of their values may be contradictory to all of your values. And yet I'm going to open myself up to that person. And
to ask you a follow-up question, where is the line between suspending the judgment and judging someone.
Our requirements. We have to spouse abuse or any crime that a person indicates they're intending to commit or harm that they're intending to do to themselves or
Hmm.
others. You
Hmm.
have to act on that judgment. You have to,
Yes.
and you say to them when we sit down, everything we say is confidential, except if you reveal child abuse to me, if you tell me you're going to hurt yourself or others, I am obligated to report it. So there's your very clear red line. Other than that, my job is to be there and reflect back to them, who they are. Mm.
And that's mandatory reporting.
That's mandatory reporting. A lot of the reflecting that we do as social worker in finding out the opinion that people have of others, we find out a lot about who they think they are themselves.
Interesting. Very interesting. Now let's move to the third category, which is contemplative practice.
Mm-hmm.
It adds a third move. It asks you to suspend the categories altogether. But suspending categories is also how people avoid moral clarity.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the line for you between reading a person without categories and refusing to see them clearly?
I would say that the idea of what meditation is, I think we need to talk about that for a moment. A lot of people
Sure,
think
yeah.
that meditation is about emptying the mind, kind of quieting the chatter. I say that meditation, there's a quote in one of the Rocky Balboa where where he says to his son, the world will knock you down, and it's not about how many times you get knocked down. It's about how many times you can get back up. So
Okay.
meditation is more a strengthening exercise than it is a quieting exercise. We train our mind, but to step back from our thoughts and actually observe our thoughts without trying to prevent them, allowing our thoughts to run through and ultimately coming to the conclusion that I am not my thoughts. So you have this thought, and immediately that thought becomes your truth because you had it. The thought occurred in your head and you had it. But Ali, when we talk about our thoughts, what do we say? We say, I had a thought. So my question is always, who is it that had the thought? If I say I had a thought, who is it that had the thought? Because it's not, we have conflated who I am and the thoughts that I have. That's like saying that the computer is its programming. It's not. The computer is not its programming. We have been programmed by life, and a lot of data has been fed into us, including values and the like, and some of them may be helpful and some not. Some may be accurate and some not, but it is our truth. And the moment we can step back from our thoughts and realize that we are not our thoughts and look at them from an objective place, we can do this gently and we can do it non-judgmentally. We start to develop the ability to realize, oh my gosh, I do have these racial biases. I've been trying to prevent and say, no, I'm colorblind. But now I can see that, well, no, I have these biases and I can look at it, recognize it, accept it, and allow it. And eventually I might decide that maybe some of those conclusions that I arrived at when I was 4 and 5 years old are not serving me well as an adult. But I can only do it from a place where I divorce myself from believing that I am my thought. I have to get to the place where I believe I am not my thoughts. I have thoughts, and that gives me access to modifying them and actually designing the person that I choose to be rather than being the person that the world gave me.
Okay.
And so it's like going to the gym. I mean, it's a lot of repetitive work, having a thought, noticing it, your mind wandering, losing focus, noticing it, coming back. It's like doing bicep curls for the mind.
So moving on, what you have just described, generally speaking, is three frameworks in tension. I want to press on exactly where that tension breaks. Here is the seam I keep coming back to, and I want to put it to you directly. The way of reading a person that helps you win in a courtroom may be the same one that prevents you from understanding them. Have you actually lived that contradiction, a case you won by refusing to understand someone?
Whoa. Let's say that I'm a prosecutor, I've got a detective on the case. And let's say the detective has opinions about women and opinions about poor people and homeless people that I don't hold.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just say that we're worlds apart in how we think about these things. But he's a good detective, and he has gone out and he has found a fingerprint, and he's going to bring that fingerprint into court, and I'm going to show it to the jury. I don't care in that moment one little bit how he feels about the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure that he can testify about how he picked up that fingerprint, where he found it, and how he lifted it, and that he's competent to be able to do what his job is doing. We used to have an old TV show called Dragnet, and the detective's tagline, he was always saying to people, "The facts, ma'am, just the facts. The facts, ma'am, just the facts." At that point, I don't need to understand him. Now, if I'm talking to a 13-year-old rape victim,
Mm-hmm.
it's a different story. I
Yes.
need to be able to evaluate, is she going to be able to survive the cross-examination on the stand? Is she going to be a good witness? Is she believable? And decide. And that could have a very significant effect on how the case goes, because let's say I've got this 13-year-old and she is very susceptible to suggestion. Like, you can get her to say pretty much anything, as an adult. If you tell her, isn't it true that such and so happened, she's going to
Mm-hmm.
answer yes to it because she thinks that's what you want to hear. It's just
I
her
see.
personality. Well, that person who raped her might be looking at 40 or 50 or 60 years in prison if they were convicted. And I might go to the defense attorney and say, if your guy wants to plead guilty, I'll reduce the charge down to 6 years. Because I know that if I go to trial, there's maybe a 30 or 40% chance of a not guilty because the witness can't carry the load. And so that would affect in my negotiations of, plea bargaining. And then I might offer them a plea that gives them the opportunity to get much less than they would get if they went to trial. On the other hand, if she's a very strong witness, that would affect the plea negotiations as well. And so it all kind of comes out in the wash, so to speak.
Examples you gave here. Your book reimagines the Tao Te Ching in dialogue with Christian wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
The risk in any such project is a feel-good blend where nothing genuinely conflicts. So let me ask the uncomfortable version. Where do these two traditions actually contradict each other in ways you could not reconcile and chose not to paper over?
You're absolutely right. They almost are absolutely irreconcilable.
I see.
Christianity teaches that there is a God,
Mhm.
and teaches that in some avenues of Christianity that Jesus is the Son of God, binding that holds everything together in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost. The Tao makes no mention of a superior being, and it's an irrelevant question. Is there a superior being? Matter of fact, the concept of a superior being is completely different. I would say that in Taoism, the concept of is the Tao. And the Tao is a flow of energy that is non-judgmental. It has a positive and a negative aspect to it, but not like positive is good and negative is bad, more like the poles of a battery.
I see.
So yin and yang, you've heard of yin and yang before. Well, yin is the negative pole of the battery and yang is the positive pole of the battery, but one's not good and one's not bad. It's just the way that electricity flows. And in
I
Taoism,
see.
it is conceived of the idea that all data that exists flows on that flow of energy. And if you put enough data together, you have an intelligence, but the intelligence is not defined in the Tao Te Ching, that the Tao cannot be known, but its manifestation can be felt. These energies have different frequencies and it has different amplitudes. There is a time where you can make progress, and there's a time when you have to pull back. The energy is saying, this isn't your time, so you need to wait and be patient. Or there's a time where you've been waiting long enough, it's time to punch through. So the Tao indicates that there is this energy. Our job is to be able to identify the energy of the moment and align yourself with it so that you act effectively and efficiently. I'll give you like an easy example, Ali. Let's say that you have a terrific idea and you want to share it with your friends and you're all excited about it. And this is a great idea and we're going to have so much fun and blah, blah. And then you go down and you see your friends and you go up and you start trying to tell them, the idea, but they're talking about, where they're going to go for dinner tonight.
I see.
So this is not the time that you're going to be listened to. So you have two choices. Either you're going to tell them to shut up and listen to you and force yourself on them, which probably is not the most effective or efficient way to handle it, or you're going to recognize that this isn't the time. You're going to pull back, be patient, wait until somebody turns to you and says, so what was that you wanted to say? Now they're open to it. Now what you're doing is effective and efficient. Okay?
Yes.
In Christianity, the way that we would say the same thing is our job is to align ourselves with God's will. One of them is completely non-deistic. It's completely non-judgmental. It just is what it is. The other, there is good and bad, and they've developed concepts of like substitutionary atonement. Jesus died for our sins. There's nothing like that in Taoism. So these are two very, very distant systems of belief. But if you look at the teachings of Jesus and the teachings of the Bible on how to live, and you look at the teachings of Lao Tzu on how to live, you'll find that they are incredibly alike. They are virtual mirrors of each other.
Okay.
So if you get away from the cosmos, but you get into the nuts and bolts of how you want to live, for example, Lao Tzu says to be wary of leadership and always when your work is done to step down, because the important thing is the work and that the work needs to endure, but it can't if you stay in it, it becomes about you, and then the ego takes over, and then it becomes about you, and then it becomes controversial, and people find fault, and all of your work could be wasted. And what the Bible says about Jesus's life is that, and he went wherever he was called to go. And also, when his work was done, he ascended. He said, my work here is done. I'm going back to live with my Father. So the teaching literally is the same. Lao Tzu says that we need to develop the ability to enjoy the joy of other people, even to the point where if you're looking for a promotion and a friend of yours gets the promotion instead of you, we should cultivate the ability to be happy for them and with them. Lao Tzu says. Jesus tells the story of the parable of the prodigal son, and he tells the same thing. If you know the story, the son comes back, and the other son who stayed is sitting upstairs sulking while they're having this party downstairs, and he's sulking. And if I was there as a good Taoist, I'd like to sit down next to him and say, hey, bro, how's this working out for you? Wouldn't it be better if he could revel in the happiness of his brother? So you can find these parallels, and that's what I did it. And the reason that I did it was because I grew up in a family that was not religious at all. All of my ancestors, literally all of my ancestors were wiped out by either the Bolsheviks, World War I, or the Nazis. My mom was Roma Gypsy. My father was Hungarian. And so I grew up not anti-religious, but just no religion. The first time I was introduced to anything was in my mid-30s. I was introduced to Taoism, and since it didn't require me to believe in a god or angels or cherubs or, devils or anything else, it was a system that I could engage in. Because I promise you, if you grow up without being introduced to the concept of a supernatural being like a god, it's very hard to accept it in your 30s. And so,
Yeah.
so here was something that taught me how to live without having to believe in anything. And then I wound up marrying a Southern Baptist Bible literalist, somebody who believed the Bible stories literally. Now, she is in Buddhism, we would call her a bodhisattva. She is an angel of angels. And our values were identical, but our belief systems were very different. She thought that my stuff was weird and I couldn't buy her science, that the world was 4,000 years old or the like. We had floods and I couldn't buy that. But then one day I sat down with the Tao Te Ching, which is the main book of Taoism, and I started thinking, could I reimagine this and put it into a language that she could understand? So I played around with one of the verses and I was able to do that. And when she read it, she goes, "Your stuff's not that weird."
I see.
And so I did another one and another one. Finally, I did all 81, and then a publisher heard about it and it got published. So it is a great way of combining the life lessons, not the cosmologies, but the life lessons of both traditions in a way that, the East can actually speak to the West.
This is very interesting and leads smoothly to the next point, which is it's the same blending instinct appears in your platform. And I want to press it the same way I pressed the book. Your platform, the flow, describes itself as neither left nor right, but between quote unquote, I'm above. The division can become its own posture, a way of not being accountable to any position. How do you keep not left, not right from quietly becoming its own ideology that you stop examining?
I would have to, confess that it certainly does lean left. Because the very definition of what is left and right indicates that the left is more open-minded and progressive and open to new ideas. The very word liberal, is defined that way. And conservative means we want to keep things exactly as they are. We're conservative about any kind of change. So that kind of lends itself to a more open mind. In today's world in America, the right has been corrupted.
Because that's a striking admission that it's left, not right.
Yes, I confess. I confess.
Okay.
I confess. Okay. I confess that it does lean left. A deep analysis of what is so, based on the facts alone, would tend to make a person's conclusion about what's real and what's true to basically fall into the camp that many people define as left. The idea of going to war in Iran. If you look at a deep analysis of it, the facts simply are that there was no imminent threat. There is no evidence that there was an imminent threat. There was no evidence that there was a nuclear weapon about to be discovered. The reason that was promoted for the attack on Iran was that it was an imminent threat. Well, there's no evidence. I'm a lawyer. I'm looking at the evidence. I would say that doesn't seem to be accurate. This seems to be accurate. And so the statement, the war in Iran was a war of choice, would be seen by most people as a left-leaning statement. But it happens to be the accurate statement according to the facts. So just because you're not left or right doesn't mean that you have to in some way mellow or modify the truth in order to fit into some concept of neutrality. The truth is the truth. A concerted effort on the part of the leadership on the right to promote disinformation, if you just look at the facts. And so I absolutely confess that you would define many of my positions as left-leaning.
Okay, which brings us back to the question this whole conversation has been circling. What does your work help us read more carefully about the world after everything we have talked about?
A couple of things. One, we are truly insignificant, and there is a wonderful freedom in insignificance, okay? Because think about it, we are, right now, you and I are miles apart, but nevertheless, I'm in Costa Rica right now, and I'm in a small town, in a small country, on a mini continent, in a hemisphere, on a planet, in a solar system, in a galaxy, among thousands and millions of galaxies. I'm going to live, I'm going to die, and it's not going to make a bit of difference to Alpha Centauri. I mean, there is a certain insignificance. What comes out of that is don't be so full of yourself.
Okay.
Don't be so full of yourself. You're going to live, you're going to die. It's not going to matter. So if you're not that, if you're insignificant, then certainly all your problems are pretty insignificant too. Now, it may not feel that way, but if you can recognize these feelings of urgency and importance and danger and the like, all of them as part of this very insignificant life, you then have the freedom of putting into your life whatever meaning and purpose and significance you choose to make of it. All of these traditions, all of these faith leaders, all of Jesus and Lao Tzu and Buddha and Gandhi, all of these great wisdom teachers, everybody thinks they came to this planet helping us to be better people and to live better lives and to make a better world. And I say, maybe not. Maybe their message was much more simple. Maybe their message was just simply this: please be happy.
Okay.
And
That's
it just happens to be that coincidentally, the path to happiness is one of kindness and compassion and generosity. These are the qualities that lead to a happy life. And so maybe they were just trying to teach us to be happy.
And that's where we'll leave it.
Okay.
To be happy.
Be happy.
Many thanks to Bob Martin for this conversation on how law, clinical work, and contemplative practice each teach a different way of reading a human being, and each refuse to see something. What I hope this leaves us with is not a method for becoming wiser readers of people. It's something more uncomfortable, a sense that the institutions reading us, legal, therapeutic, educational, spiritual, are not neutral instruments. Each one trains a particular attention, and each one has its blind. The sharper question isn't which framework is right, it's noticing which one is reading you in a given moment and what it has already decided not to see. Thank you for listening to Reading the World. I'm Ali Alhajji. Until next time, keep reading carefully.